The night I made a joke that wasn't really a joke. It was -19 outside, and the roads on the south end of Ottawa had turned to glass. My name is Sebastian Kirby. I'm 38 years old, and I work as an urban planner for the National Capital Commission, the federal agency that oversees what gets built, preserved, and changed in the capital. I spend most of my days reviewing development proposals, walking construction sites, arguing with architects about sight lines, and writing reports that most people will never read. It's unglamorous work by most standards, but I like it. I like knowing that something I helped approve will still be standing in 50 years. I grew up here, left for school in Montreal, came back, and never thought seriously about leaving again. I've been on my own for 2 years. Before that, 6 years with Claudia, not married, but close enough that the end of it felt like a divorce. We owned a condo together in the Glebe, split the cost of a used Subaru, kept a shared calendar that governed every weekend from September through May. Claudia works in marketing for a pharmaceutical company downtown. She's the kind of person who treats every conversation like a pitch, always angling, always positioning, always reading the room for where the power is. I used to find that quality magnetic. By the end, it exhausted me. She wanted me to take a management role I didn't want. She wanted us to move to a neighborhood we couldn't quite afford because the postal code mattered more to her than the mortgage stress. She wanted a version of me I could see from a distance but couldn't actually reach, and for years I kept running toward it because I loved her and believed that love meant becoming whatever the other person needed. It doesn't. It just means running yourself empty. We ended things on a gray, slushy March afternoon, the kind of Ottawa day that makes you wonder why I ain't chose to build a city here. No screaming. Just 2 adults sitting at a kitchen table in a condo we'd have to sell. Agreeing it was over, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Centertown with 1 bookshelf and a dining table I'd inherited from my grandfather. I rebuilt slowly, cooked for 1, ate at that table in silence, and after a while, the silence stopped feeling like something was missing and started feeling like mine. Then there's Quinn, my younger sister. 29, a registered nurse at the Ottawa Hospital on the Civic Campus, a woman who has somehow maintained a social life despite working 36-hour stretches and collapsing for 12 hours before starting again. Quinn is the person in our family who keeps people from drifting apart. She plans the dinners, sends the birthday texts, remembers everyone's food preferences. She also leaves things everywhere and relies on other people to retrieve them. That Tuesday in January, she texted me at 7:30 in the evening. She'd left a binder of shift schedules at her friend Vera's place. Could I swing by and pick it up? She needed it for the morning. Vera lived 10 minutes from me. I said sure. I want to be clear, I didn't think anything of it. It was a simple errand. I'd be there and back in 20 minutes. I'd met Vera through Quinn. They'd been close since their early 20s, the kind of friendship that forms when 2 people are strangers in a new city at the same time and decide, almost out of necessity, to look after each other. Vera is a food writer. She develops recipes, tests them obsessively in her apartment kitchen, and writes about them for food magazines and a handful of national websites. She'd come to a few of the low-key dinners Quinn liked to throw in my apartment. Nothing formal, just people and wine and a kitchen that got too crowded too fast. The first time I really noticed Vera, she was standing near the window at one of those evenings, not talking to anyone, watching the snow come down on Bank Street with a glass of red wine held in both hands like she was trying to stay warm. Everyone else was loud. She was somewhere else entirely. I remember thinking she was the only person in the room who looked genuinely content rather than performing it. I didn't let myself think beyond that. I was 2 months out of 6 years with Claudia. The last thing I needed was to notice anyone. When I pulled up to Vera's building that January night, the temperature had dropped to -19, and the roads were sheeted in ice. The walk from my car to her door took about 40 seconds, and I could feel the cold pressing through my jacket before I reached the buzzer. She answered in a gray cable-knit sweater and wool socks, hair loose, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead like she'd been mid-sentence when I arrived. "Hey," she said. "Come in, the binder's right here." It was sitting on the kitchen counter. I could have grabbed it and left. 2 minutes like I'd planned. But Vera said, "I just put tea on. You want some before you head back out into that?" She tilted her head toward the window. Through it I could see the streetlights catching the ice on the road, every surface sharp and silver. I said yes, because I'm not an idiot. Her apartment was exactly what I would have expected from her if I'd been paying close enough attention to have expectations. One wall of shelves holding cookbooks and novels with cracked spines and folded receipts used as bookmarks, a small kitchen with copper pots hanging from a rack above the island, a cutting board still dusted with flour from whatever she'd been making before I arrived, a dining table pushed against the window with 2 chairs and a candle burned low. The living room had a deep corduroy couch the color of moss and draped over the left armrest a charcoal gray wool blanket, thick and neatly folded, the kind of thing you could tell was well made by how it held its shape. We sat down. She handed me a plain white ceramic mug, and we started people do when the stated reason for the visit has been handled and the cold outside makes going back out feel slightly unreasonable. We started with Quinn, her schedule, her habit of leaving things in other people's apartments. How she'd once forgotten her stethoscope at a Tim Hortons and not noticed until she was already on shift. We laughed about that. Then Vera told me she was testing recipes for a cookbook proposal about winter cooking in Canada, what it actually means to feed yourself through a season that lasts 5 months and takes real effort to survive. She started asking me questions about the NCC, about how urban green space gets designed for winter versus summer, whether parks were truly planned for cold weather use or just built for June and left to manage on their own once the snow arrived. Real questions, follow-up questions. The kind that told me she'd been thinking about the answer before I gave it. I lost track of time. When I checked my phone, it was past 11. I looked at the window. The street below was still. The ice was not going anywhere. The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees according to my weather app. I looked at Vera and laughed and said it without really thinking. The way you say something that feels like nothing. Roads aren't getting better tonight. Any chance I can just stay until morning? Vera blushed. Not a subtle shift, a real immediate flush starting at her cheekbones and moving fast. She went quiet for one moment, then she looked at the couch and, very carefully, very practically, "There's a blanket right there, it's warm, you'd be comfortable." I said thank you. I stretched out on that corduroy couch and pulled the charcoal blanket over myself, and fell asleep in an apartment that smelled like cardamom and something sweet baked earlier in the day. I slept better than I had in months. I didn't understand what I was resting under until much later. That blanket had been folded on the arm of that couch since the November after we first met. Not for guests, for me, but I didn't know that yet, I just knew I slept well. Over the following 2 months, Quinn started calling in more favors. Could I drop her gym bag at Vera's on my way downtown? Vera had been asking how to fix a sticky kitchen drawer. Could I just show her? She'd left her winter boots at Vera's again. Grab them. I said yes every time. Quinn always needed something and I was always the one she called. I didn't question it. I didn't connect the dots. What I noticed instead, without consciously cataloging any of it, were the small things. Every time I showed up at Vera's apartment, tea was already made. Not just hot water waiting, but actually brewed, the kind that takes intention and specific timing. She remembered I liked black tea, no milk, steeped long enough to have real weight to it. I'd mentioned that preference once, in passing, at one of Quinn's dinners, and Vera had held on to it. She remembered other things. I'd mentioned offhand that I was working on a proposal for a new skating trail along the Rideau River, trying to argue for a route through a neighborhood that usually got overlooked in capital planning. 3 weeks later, Vera asked about it. The specific neighborhood. The specific argument I was trying to make. Like she'd been turning it over since I mentioned it. Most people don't retain details like that. You only hold on to details that matter to you. One evening I went to help her fix a sticky drawer in the kitchen. We ended up kneeling on the floor together, pulling the whole thing out, finding the track had warped. While I was adjusting it, her elbow brushed mine and she went still for a second before shifting to give me more room. I pretended not to notice. I noticed. A few weeks after that, she called me at 10:30 on a Wednesday. The heat in her apartment had stopped working. Could I come look? I drove over through a February snowstorm. When I got inside and found the thermostat, it was set correctly. I checked the baseboards. Everything was fine. The apartment was warm. Vera stood behind me and said, "That's so strange, it was definitely cold earlier," and didn't meet my eyes. We sat down, she made tea, we talked until midnight. When I stood up to leave, she walked me to the door and stood in the frame, watching me pull on my coat. "Roads aren't too bad tonight," she said, which was true. Then, quietly, "Drive carefully, and she stayed there, one hand on the doorframe, watching me down the hall until I reached the elevator. I didn't look back. I don't know why I think about that now. A week later, I invited both Vera and Quinn for dinner. Quinn canceled an hour before. A colleague called in sick she had to cover. Vera came anyway. I made lamb stew I'd been refining since November, and she ate 2 bowls and asked me to walk her through the spice ratios. We washed dishes standing side by side and talked over our shoulders, the comfortable kind of conversation you only have with someone you're genuinely at ease around. Before she left, she wandered to my bookshelf, ran her fingers along the spines, and pulled out a food memoir I'd owned for years and never read. "I know the woman who wrote this," she said. "We went to journalism school together. She's brilliant." She put it back, reached into her bag, and produced a small food magazine I'd never seen. "I wrote the cover piece for this one." She opened to the inside cover, borrowed a pen from my desk, signed her name beside her byline in small, careful letters, handed it back. I still have that magazine. It lives on my nightstand. Her signature in the corner, the handwriting tilting slightly to the left. Then Claudia called. I hadn't heard from her in 4 months. Her name on my screen still made something tighten in my chest. Not longing exactly. More like the feeling right before weather changes. I picked up. She wanted to grab coffee, just to catch up, as adults. I agreed because I genuinely believed I was past the point where she could touch anything that still mattered. I was wrong about that. She was already seated at a cafe on Elgin Street when I arrived. Perfect posture, good coat, a latte she hadn't touched. She asked about the NCC, about the apartment, about the Centertown neighborhood, normal enough. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice slightly. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at Quinn's friend's place. The food writer." She said it like she was reading a weather report. I told her Vera was Quinn's friend, and I was just helping out with things around her apartment. Claudia tilted her head and smiled, the specific smile that once meant she was about to take something apart, and said, "Be careful, Sebastian. You have a habit of not understanding what people actually want from you until it's too late to do anything about it." I left that coffee shop with that sentence following me home like a draft under a door. Because the thing about Claudia was that she always knew exactly which words would travel. She didn't need to be right. She just needed the seed to take root. 3 weeks later, Claudia found Vera. It wasn't difficult. Vera had been doing a guest cooking demonstration at a food market event at Lansdowne Park, the kind of Saturday afternoon thing that still draws a crowd in late winter because people are desperate by March for any reason to be outside and feel like the city is alive again. Claudia walked up after the demonstration, introduced herself, and said loudly enough for the people nearby to hear, "Sebastian is a good person, but he takes a long time to realize what he's standing next to. I waited 6 years for him to figure it out. I hope your situation turns out differently." It was not a warning. It was a demolition with a pleasant expression. Vera didn't confront me. That wasn't her way. But I felt the shift within days, the way you feel a pressure inch before a storm when the sky still looks clear. Her text came slower. When I suggested getting together, she was busy, then had a deadline, then wasn't feeling great. Each reason was completely plausible. Together, they formed a wall. The last time I went to her apartment before everything changed, the blanket wasn't on the couch. I noticed it the moment I sat down, though I couldn't have explained why it registered so clearly, or why something in me went cold when I saw the empty armrest. The couch looked the same, the apartment looked the same, but charcoal wool blanket that had always been draped across the left arm was gone. I sat there and stared at the spot where it had been, and I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. A specific kind of loss, some that comes from suddenly understanding the shape of something only after it's been removed. We talked for an hour and it felt like talking through glass. The ease was gone, and the blanket was not there. I drove home and sat in my parking garage for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Quinn called 3 days later, not a casual text, a real call like she'd made a decision to make it. "What happened between you and Vera?" she said. She told me what Claudia had said at Lansdowne. It had taken days of careful, patient pressing before Vera admitted it. Quinn was not loud about being angry. She was precise. "You know she cares about you," she said. "I've known it for over a year. The tea that's always ready when you get there. The way she saves things to tell you, articles, recipes, things that happened during her week, because she's been waiting until she sees you. The fact that she's turned down 2 people who asked her out in the last 8 months. You're not oblivious, Sebastian. You just haven't wanted to see it, because seeing it means you have to do something about it. That landed differently than I expected, because Quinn was right. I had seen it. I'd felt the specific weight of the tea she handed me every single time, always the right brew, always ready. I'd felt her stillness when our elbows touched on the kitchen floor. I'd felt her standing in the doorway watching me walk away. I'd felt all of it, and I had labeled every piece of it as friendship. As Vera just being generous, just being warm, just being the kind of person who takes care of the people around her. I'd done that deliberately, because if I let myself see it clearly, I'd have to risk something. And the last time I'd risked something that size, I'd come out the other end with an empty condo, a split RRSP, and 2 years of learning to be alone again. I called Claudia that night. I didn't raise my voice. I said, you had no right to do that. We've been over for 2 years and I need you to actually let that be true. She started to say she was trying to help. I said we were done with this conversation and I hung up. Outside it was snowing. Ottawa in March is still fully winter and doesn't apologize for it. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the snow fall under the streetlights across the river and thought about a charcoal blanket that was no longer on a couch. I thought about tea steeped the exact way I liked it, brewed before I arrived. I thought about a magazine signed on the inside cover, now sitting on my nightstand. I thought about all the small, precise ways Vera had been telling me something for over a year, and how I had looked at every single piece of evidence and called it hospitality. I gave myself 1 week. I ran along the Ottawa River before dawn, the ice on the water catching the light from the Gatineau side. I went to work. I wrote a report on sustainable winter maintenance for the River Trail proposal. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror one morning and thought clearly, without flinching, about the difference between being cautious and being a coward, and about what it would cost me to keep choosing safety over the one thing that had actually felt real in 2 years. Then I drove to Vera's apartment on a Thursday evening in late March. No reason, no forgotten item, no broken fixture, no ice on the roads to blame. I checked the forecast before I left. -3 clear skies. No excuse whatsoever. I took the stairs instead of the elevator because I needed the time. I still didn't know what I was going to say when the door opened. I didn't figure it out on the stairs. I knocked anyway. Vera opened the door. She looked surprised first, then something more guarded. Her arms crossed slightly. She said, "Quinn doesn't have anything at my place right now." That sentence hurt more than she knew. I said, "I'm not here for Quinn, and I'm not here because of the weather." She stood in the doorway and didn't move. The hallway behind me was empty, the fluorescent light overhead buzzing faintly. Someone's dinner, garlic, something drifting up from a few floors below. I held her gaze and I said, "I know what Claudia said to you at Lansdowne, and I need you to know she was partly right. I have been slow about a lot of things here, now, and I didn't drive across the city tonight for a binder or a thermostat." Vera was quiet for a long time. Then she looked past me, not at me, and when she spoke, her voice was low and careful and not quite steady. "The heat was never broken," she said. "I just wanted you to come over. I just wanted to sit in my kitchen with you and pretend that was enough." She took a breath. "The night you asked if you could stay, I'd been hoping for a reason to say yes since the first winter you walked into this apartment." She stopped. Then she said, "The thing I will carry for the rest of my life. That blanket." She swallowed. "I bought it the November after the first time you were here. There's a shop in the Glebe. They sell Canadian wool goods, everything local, blankets and throws, the real kind that last. I went in one afternoon thinking about a project I was working on, and somehow I ended up thinking about how you'd mentioned once that your apartment had terrible insulation, that you were always cold. I bought the blanket and I brought it home and I put it on the couch, not because I have guests, because I hoped that eventually you would be there to use it." Her voice cracked, small and controlled. "Every time you came over, I took it out of the closet and draped it on the left armrest the same way, the same place. Every time you left, I folded it back and put it away, for over a year, and when Claudia said what she said, I put it in the closet and left it there because I didn't think." She pressed her lips together hard. "I didn't think you were ever going to notice what it meant." Her eyes were wet. She still wasn't quite looking at me. I didn't kiss her. I didn't make a speech. I said 2 words. "Get it." She looked at me, confused and uncertain, and something else. something careful and afraid and hoping. I said, "Go get the blanket, I want tea and I want to sit on your couch, and tonight I'm staying because I want to, not because of the weather." Vera stood there for one more second. Then she smiled, small and real and slightly shaky, the kind that starts somewhere behind the eyes before it reaches the mouth, and she turned and walked inside. When she came back, the charcoal blanket was folded over her arm. She crossed to the couch and draped it across the left armrest, in the same spot, smoothed the edge flat with one hand. Then she went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. I sat down and put my hand on the blanket and felt its weight. Dense, warm, well-made. The weight of something that had been waiting for over a year on a shelf a closet, taken out for me, folded back for me, kept for me without a single word spoken about what it meant. I'd been resting under the weight of someone's love for 14 months, and I had called it a blanket. We didn't change everything overnight. That's not how either of us worked. I started calling her directly, would come in as a go-between without a reason attached. "I'm trying a new pasta. Want to come over and tell me what I did wrong?" She said, "What time?" Just that. No preamble, no qualification, just yes. The small things started accumulating the way they do when two people stop being careful around each other. One morning, I came into my kitchen and found a chef's knife on the counter that I hadn't put there. Vera had decided the one I was using was inadequate and had quietly replaced it during dinner the night before, and said absolutely nothing. I noticed the next morning when the weight was different in my hand. I stood there holding it for a while. This was how we talked, not with grand statements but with small deliberate things placed where the other person would find them. She left a cookbook she wanted me to read on my nightstand. I bought the specific loose-leaf tea she used every morning and put it in the cabinet without announcing it. Neither of us made anything out of either of these moments. We just built the language slowly, the way you learn something by living inside it. The first time I held her hand, we were walking along the Rideau Canal on a Sunday in January, the last good week of the skating season, the ice still clean and thick. We weren't skating, just walking the bank, our breath visible. The city gone quiet, around us the way it does when it's properly cold and most people have stayed sensibly indoors. I reached over and took her hand without looking at her. Vera folded her fingers around mine without breaking her stride. Neither of us said anything. The cold kept doing what cold does. We kept walking. 6 months in, Quinn called. She skipped the greeting entirely. She just said, "Finally," and I could hear the grin through the phone without even trying. Then, "You know I arranged most of it, right? The gym bag, the boots, the binder that first night. I genuinely needed that binder, but everything after it was completely manufactured. Every single favor." I laughed despite myself. "Quinn, you were both impossible," she said. "Someone had to do something." She wasn't wrong, and I couldn't hold it against her, because without her architecture of convenient amnesia, I might have spent another year convincing myself that everything I felt in that apartment was just warmth, just generosity, just Vera being the kind of person she was. I would have missed it. I would have missed her. Love with Claudia had been a negotiation that never ended, always about who I was supposed to become and how far I still had to go to get there. Love with Vera is something else. She asks me to walk her through the projects I'm working on and then actually listens, asks the specific follow-up, tells me when she thinks the city got something right and when it didn't. She feeds me. She lets me sit in her kitchen while she works, and neither of us needs to fill the silence when the silence is already full. There's no performance in it, just two people learning to share the same quiet. At 14 months, I finished a master plan for a winter park development along the Ottawa River, a project I'd been fighting for through 2 budget cycles and 1 change in city committee leadership. Opening ceremony was a cold Tuesday in December. Vera came. She didn't stand in the front row or take photographs. She stood at the edge of the crowd with her hands in her coat pockets, just watching. When the last of the officials left and the park was empty and still and cold, she walked over to where I was standing and looked out at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me and said 4 words. "You did good, Sebastian." Claudia never once said those 4 words, not in 6 years. I stood in the park I'd helped build and felt, for the first time in longer than I could name, that the work I did meant something. Not because of its scale or how long it would last, but because there was someone standing beside me who actually understood why it mattered to me. At 2 years I proposed on the canal. It was a Sunday afternoon in February, the sky flat and white, the kind of overcast light that makes Ottawa look like a photograph from 50 years ago. We were walking the bank, not skating, just walking, our breath making small clouds. I stopped near the section I'd always loved best, where the canal curves and the Parliament buildings are just visible in the distance through the bare elms. I didn't have a ring box. I had a folded piece of drafting paper, and on it I'd sketched, deliberately rough, deliberately small, a blank draped over the arm of a couch. Below it I'd written, "For every cold night, every excuse, and every night that didn't need one." Vera unfolded it and read it. She went quiet for long enough that I started to worry. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and pressed the paper flat against her chest, and looked at me and said, "Sebastian Kirby, this is the most you thing that has ever happened to me." It was snowing lightly by then. Of course it was. This is Ottawa. It always snows at the parts that matter. Quinn called that evening before we'd had a chance to tell anyone. She already knew somehow. She said finally again, and it sounded exactly the same as the first time, like a word she'd been saving up for months. "The charcoal blanket lives on our couch now, out in the open, not tucked away in any closet. Some mornings I come downstairs before Vera and I sit underneath it with my coffee, and I think about a January night and a joke that wasn't really a joke and a woman who blushed and answered so carefully, so practically, so exactly right. It's warm. You'd be comfortable." She was right. She's been right about most of it. If you've ever had someone love you quietly, in small careful acts, while you called it something smaller than what it was, you already know the specific weight of the thing you were holding without understanding what you held. The question I keep coming back to is this: did you figure it out in time? And if you were in Vera's place, would you have waited in silence? Or would you have said something long before I was brave enough to show up without an excuse? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.